Before dawn on the 9th of July, 1762, a carriage is moving fast towards St. Petersburg. The woman inside it hasn't slept. A few hours earlier, a rider had come out to the palace where she was staying with the news that one of her fellow conspirators had been arrested in the night, which meant the plot was going to be finished by lunchtime, one way or the other. She's 33. She's German. She has no Russian blood in her at all, no army of her own, and no legal claim whatsoever to the throne of the largest country on earth. What she has is a lover with brothers in the guards, and about 6 hours. The carriage stops at the barracks of the Izmailovsky regiment. She climbs down and asks the soldiers standing there to protect her from her husband. Her husband is the Emperor of Russia. By that evening she'd be in a Green Guards uniform, on horseback, riding out at the head of a column to go and arrest him. 8 days later he was dead in a country house, of an illness that nobody in Europe believed in. She ruled for the next 34 years. And almost everything you think you know about how she died is wrong. Catherine the Great. She was born on the 2nd of May, 1729, in Stettin, a Prussian port on the Baltic that today is Szczecin in Poland. Her name was Sophie. Princess Sophia Augusta Frederica of Anhalt-Zerbst, which is an enormous title for a family with almost no money. Her father was a prince on paper and a Prussian general in practice, governing Stettin for the king in Berlin. Noble, respectable, and broke. In a world like that, a clever daughter was a piece of capital, and her mother worked the German marriage market on her behalf for years, writing to any court that would write back. Then, in 1744, an answer came from the biggest court of all. The Empress Elizabeth of Russia was looking for a wife for her nephew and heir, an awkward boy called Karl Peter Ulrich, and she had settled on the girl from Anhalt-Zerbst. Sophie was 15 when she got to Russia. She never saw Stettin again. And she didn't stay Sophie for long either. Russia was a foreign planet, and she treated it like a problem to be solved. She didn't speak the language. She didn't know the religion. She'd met her future husband exactly once, years before, at a family gathering when they were both about 10. So she studied. She got up in the night to repeat her Russian lessons alone in her bedroom, kept at it through a Petersburg winter, and pushed it hard enough that she came down with pneumonia and very nearly died before the wedding was even arranged. On the 28th of June, 1744, she gave up the Lutheran church she'd been raised in and was received into Russian Orthodoxy under a new name, Yekaterina Alexievna. All of it was deliberate. Speak like them, pray like them, and in time nobody asked where you came from. The wedding took place on the 21st of August, 1745. And then, for years, nothing. The marriage went unconsummated. The whole court kept count, and by the time a son named Paul arrived in 1754, the question of who had actually fathered him was already being asked out loud. Her own memoirs, written much later, strongly implied it wasn't her husband. Historians still argue about it, and those memoirs are anything but a neutral witness. The Empress Elizabeth died on the 5th of January, 1762, and the awkward boy from that family gathering became Emperor Peter III. He lasted 6 months. His problem wasn't cruelty, it was taste. He worshipped Frederick II of Prussia, the man Russian soldiers had spent years and enormous casualties fighting in the 7 Years' War, and one of the first things he did on taking the throne was call off the Russian operations against him. Then he started planning a fresh war against Denmark, over Holstein, a small duchy in northern Germany that mattered enormously to him and not at all to Russia. Denmark was a Russian ally. To the officer corps, this didn't look like foreign policy. It looked like a man handing their war to the foreign king he admired. And at court he humiliated his wife in public, openly, in front of people who were taking notes. So the wife, with no power and a great deal of patience, began having quiet conversations with men who had regiments behind them. One of them was her lover, an artillery officer named Grigory Orlov, and Orlov had brothers, and his brothers were officers too. So, back to that carriage. The Izmailovsky regiment came over to her almost immediately, and that is the part that still looks impossible on paper. From there she went on to the Semenovsky barracks, where the clergy were already waiting to proclaim her sole sovereign of Russia, and through the rest of that day the guards regiments at the capital swore to her one after another. Not a shot was fired in the city. That's the whole revolution. A foreign-born woman walking from barracks to barracks, asking. Her husband was at Oranienbaum, his summer palace out on the Gulf, and he heard about it late. He tried to sail for the naval fortress at Kronstadt and was refused entry at the harbour, because every man in Kronstadt had already sworn to her. That was the end of it. Within days, he signed a formal abdication. One account of it says he gave up the throne like a child being sent to bed. He was arrested at Peterhof, taken out of the capital under guard, and put in a country estate with Alexei Orlov and a small detachment of men to watch him. The estate was called Ropsha. He lasted 8 days there. On the 17th of July, 1762, Peter III died, aged 34, in the custody of the people who had just taken his throne. The government's public explanation was a severe attack of hemorrhoidal colic. That is a real condition. It is also an absurd thing to kill a healthy man of 34 in that particular house in that particular week, and nobody serious believed it. Voltaire and D'Alembert, both of them on warm terms with the new empress, said as much. Alexei Orlov's own account was of a violent quarrel at dinner, and he wrote that before anyone could pull the men apart, Peter was dead. Other accounts describe a strangling. There was never a formal inquiry, no testimony ever settled it, and here is the honest position. No surviving document proves the empress ordered his death. What is documented is that she had him arrested, that she chose that house and those men, and that his dying solved every problem she had. Complicity is easy to argue. A murder order has never been produced. That's where the record stops. Although 11 years later, somebody would stand up in the Urals and tell the empire that Peter III had never died at all, and a very large number of people would believe him. She was crowned on the 22nd of September, 1762, in the Assumption Cathedral inside the Moscow Kremlin, and she had a new crown built for it, because the old one wouldn't do. The court jeweler, Jeremy Pausier, put it together in roughly 2 months. 75 pearls, 4,936 diamonds, a red spinel of 398 carats sitting at the top under the cross, 2 and a bit kilograms of it, going onto the head of a woman who had been in the country 18 years and wasn't related to a single Russian Tsar. That crown is still the object people picture when they picture Imperial Russia, and every emperor after her was crowned in it. Which is a strange fate for a thing made in a hurry for a usurper who, on the morning she wore it, was holding the largest country in the world with nothing but the goodwill of a few thousand guardsmen. She held it for 34 years, 4 months and 8 days. Now the other half of her. The half she wanted Europe to look at. In 1767, she wrote a document called the Nakaz, the instruction, and had it read out to a commission of delegates summoned from all over the empire to draft a new law code. It's a genuinely remarkable piece of writing. She took whole arguments out of Montesquieu and out of Beccaria, and the thing argues for equal protection under the law, against torture and against the death penalty, in a country that used both without blinking. She made no secret of the borrowing. The commission sat, talked for a year and a half, and produced no law code at all. But the document did its real job, which was abroad. She wrote to Voltaire for about 15 years. She bought Denis Diderot's entire library in 1765, left the books in his house, and paid him a salary to go on being their librarian, which is one of the more elegant ways ever devised to fund the man without insulting him. The most famous critics of absolute monarchy in Europe were being paid by an absolute monarch, and they wrote about her accordingly. In 1768, she gambled her own life on a medical procedure, in public, on purpose. Smallpox was killing at a scale that's hard to hold in your head, and there was a defense against it called variolation, which meant deliberately giving a healthy person a small dose of the real disease and hoping they came through. It killed a percentage of the people who took it. Europe's royalty were largely refusing the risk. So she sent to England for a Quaker doctor named Thomas Dimsdale, brought him and his son to Saint Petersburg, and had it done to herself first, before anyone else. She also arranged, quietly, for a relay of fast horses to stand ready so the Dimsdales could be got out of the country if she died on the table. She didn't die. Her son Paul was done next, then more than 140 people of the court, and then she made a public performance of the whole thing, on the reasoning that if the Empress had survived it, a peasant might risk it too. Around 20,000 Russians had been inoculated by 1780. By 1800, it was over 2 million. Dimsdale went home a baron of the Russian Empire, £10,000 richer. Then, in the middle of September 1773, an illiterate Don Cossack called Yemelyan Pugachev stood up in the country beyond the Urals and announced that he was Peter III, that the emperor had never died at Ropsha, that he got away, hidden for 11 years, and had now come back for his throne and for his people. He looked nothing like Peter. It made no difference at all. He promised the serfs their freedom, land, and an end to the recruiting levies, and Cossacks, factory workers, Bashkirs, and runaway peasants came to him in the tens of thousands. He besieged Orenburg through the winter. He took Kazan. At its height, the government was genuinely frightened for Moscow in the middle of a war with the Ottomans. It broke in the steppe below Tsaritsyn in September 1774, where 9,000 to 10,000 of his people were killed, and his own Cossacks handed him over days later. They brought him to Moscow in an iron cage, and in January 1775, he was executed in front of a crowd. And the empress, who had written that torture and the death penalty should go, responded to all this by giving the nobles more power over their serfs than they had ever had before. That's the gap between the paper and the woman. She never closed it. The great relationship of her life began in the spring of 1774, in the middle of that rebellion. Grigory Potemkin was a cavalry officer who had been around since the coup, 10 years younger than her, enormous, moody, and by every account the only one of her favorites who was her equal in a room. The love affair burned for about 2 years. The partnership lasted 17 until the day he died. He ran the south for her, built the Black Sea Fleet, and founded cities on ground that had been steppe. He also picked her later favorites himself, which tells you a good deal about how the arrangement actually worked. And a number of historians believe the two of them were secretly married, most likely in 1774 or 1775. The case rests mainly on the way she wrote to him in private. The problem is that no marriage record has ever been found, and the candidate dates don't agree with one another, so it stays believed rather than proven. There's a daughter too, Elizaveta Temkina, born in July 1775, widely assumed to be theirs and never acknowledged by either of them. When he died on a roadside in Moldavia in the autumn of 1791, the people around her described her as devastated. What that partnership produced, in hard terms, was ground. 2 wars with the Ottoman Empire, the first from 1768 to 1774, and the second from 1787 to 1792, went about as badly for the Ottomans as any wars they ever fought. A Russian fleet destroyed an Ottoman one at Chesma in July 1770. The peace treaty of 1774 declared the Crimean Khanate independent, which sounded generous and was in fact a waiting position, because 9 years later, in 1783, she annexed Crimea outright. Then, there were the 3 partitions of Poland, carved up with Prussia and Austria, which brought most of what's now Belarus, Lithuania, and right-bank Ukraine into the empire, and erased a state that had stood for centuries. Add it all together, and the borders moved outward by something like 520,000 square kilometers in a single reign. New cities went up on the conquered ground: Kherson, Nikolaev, Sevastopol, and Yekaterinoslav, which was named after her, and which is called Dnipro today. It was an 18th century land grab conducted with 18th century manners, and it worked. She was in her 60s when the Second Turkish War ended. She had 4 years left. By November 1796 she was 67 and still working a full day. On her last full morning she got up early, the way she always had, and remarked to somebody that she'd slept unusually well. She had her coffee. She went through to her study and started on the morning's correspondence, the way she started nearly every morning of her reign. A little after 9 she went into her dressing room, and she didn't come out. Her chamberlain, Zakhar Zotov, opened the door in the end and found her collapsed on the floor. Her pulse was barely there. Her face had gone purple. She never regained consciousness, and she died the following evening, the 17th of November, 1796, in the Winter Palace. An autopsy was carried out, and it confirmed what the people at the bedside had already worked out. A cerebral hemorrhage. A stroke. That's it. That's the death of Catherine the Great. 67 years old, in a dressing room, with the morning's letters still on the desk. And it is not, even slightly, the story you've heard. Right. The story. Everybody has heard it. That she died trying to have sex with a horse lowered onto her in a harness, and that the harness gave way and crushed her. There's a version where it happens on a toilet. There is no evidence for any of it. None. Not a contemporary letter, not a diplomatic dispatch, not a hostile memoir. She died of a stroke, with an autopsy, and the whole story only starts appearing in the years after 1796, once she was safely dead and couldn't answer it. So, who invented it? The honest answer is that nobody knows. Russian Life put it plainly, that we will likely never know who started it, and laid out 4 suspects with motive. Frederick the Great of Prussia, or the English, or the French, all with reason to make an unusually successful female ruler look ridiculous instead. Russians who never accepted a German usurper. A discarded lover, with Grigory Orlov, the name most often floated. Or her own son Paul, who spent 34 years kept away from power and then had 4 years on the throne to work on her memory. Take your pick. Nobody can prove any of them. What we can say is what the story was for. It's the weapon used on powerful women right through that century. If you can't argue with what she did, you talk about what she did in bed. And the only horse that genuinely belongs in this story is a real one, called Brilliant, the horse she rode in that guard's uniform the day she took the throne. She was buried in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, and her son took the throne as Paul I. Most of what she left is still standing. The private art collection she started in 1764, in a wing off the Winter Palace she called her Hermitage, had run to something like 4,000 paintings by the end of the reign, and it is now the State Hermitage, one of the largest museums on earth. The Smolny Institute was Europe's first state-funded institution of higher education for women. She founded Russia's first public library, imported French theatre and opera wholesale, and put up the bronze horseman to Peter the Great that still stands by the Neva. The label historians keep fighting over is enlightened despot, and both of those words are carrying weight. She wrote against torture, and she expanded serfdom. She corresponded with the philosophers of Europe and then jailed a Russian one, Alexander Radishchev, over a book, calling him a rebel worse than Pugachev. Both of those are her. Neither one cancels the other out. Here's the bit that stays with me. She landed in that country at 15 with a title nobody had heard of and no money behind it, took the throne without a shot being fired, and ran the place for 34 years. And the one thing most people can tell you about her is a sex joke invented after she was dead, by people who couldn't touch her while she was alive. That's the trick, and it still works. You never have to argue with a woman's record if you can get the room laughing at her instead. Which brings me to the thing I genuinely like answered down in the comments. Of those 4 suspects, the rival king, the resentful subjects, the discarded lover, or her own son, which one do you think started it, and what makes you pick that one? And if you want more stories where the version everyone repeats turns out to be the very last thing that happened, you already know where they live.